Madam President, the disability rights movement is one of the great civil rights achievements of our time. And Chicago's Marka Bristo was that movement's Rosa Parks. Marka was a visionary, an inspiring leader who helped change Chicago and change the world when it came to the rights of the disabled. And she was my friend. Sadly, Marka died last week in her adopted hometown of Chicago at 66 years of age. In typical Marka style, she worked right on up to the few days before her death, trying to bend the arc of history just a little more toward justice before she drew her last breath. I was happy to join my colleague, Senator Tammy Duckworth, this week in sponsoring a resolution honoring Marka's life work. I'd like to take a few moments on the floor today to remember this amazing woman. While most Americans have never heard of Marka Bristo, few lives went untouched by her lifelong quest on behalf of people with disabilities. She was a nationally and internationally acclaimed leader in the disability rights movement. She helped to write and to pass the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, which outlawed discrimination against the estimated 1 in 4 Americans with disabilities. She spent the rest of her life making sure the ADA was faithfully implemented. Along with leaders like Justin Dart, Marka changed the way Americans thought about disabilities. She persuaded us to view the disability experience as a civil rights issue, not just a medical issue. To Marka's mind, what kept many people with disabilities from leading full lives was not their disability, but the barriers they faced. What needed to change, she said, was not the person with disabilities, but those obstacles that blocked their path. The problem was not that her wheelchair was too wide for certain doors. The problem was the doors were too narrow for her wheelchair. Remove the barriers, and people with disabilities can lead rich and full lives and make enormous contributions. That's part of what Marka taught me. She was tough, smart, funny, determined, and fearless. She knew how to motivate others and how to build coalitions. Her parents actually named her Marcia, but during her freshman year in college, a classmate called her Marka. She liked it, and it stuck. She moved to Chicago and earned a nursing degree from Rush University College of Nursing in 1976. In 1977, when Marka was 23 years old, working as a labor delivery nurse at a Chicago hospital, she and a friend were sitting on the shore of Lake Michigan when a dog grabbed her favorite pair of sandals and ran into the water with them. Marka dove in to retrieve her shoes, not realizing the water was shallow. She broke her neck and was paralyzed from the waist down for the rest of her life. Because of her paralysis, she lost her job, her health insurance, her home, her car, and the ability to navigate the city she loved. She thought she would never work again, but luckily, the director of Northwestern University's Prentice Women's Hospital thought otherwise and convinced her to return to nursing. At one point, she attended a work conference in San Francisco and saw for the first time an abundance of curb cuts that enabled people with disabilities to cross the street. It was an eye-opener for Marka. As she later wrote, and I quote, "No longer did I see curbs or stairs or inaccessible buses and bathrooms as a problem, around which I needed to navigate. Rather, I saw them as examples of societal discrimination and felt a responsibility to get involved to help people with disabilities in Illinois and beyond." 1980, Marka founded Access Living in Chicago, a nonprofit dedicated to helping people with disabilities, help them live as independently as possible rather than warehoused in institutions. Access Living led the fight to make public transportation in Chicago more accessible. Marka was not a shrinking violet. In 1984, she joined others chaining themselves to Chicago Transit Authority buses. She ended up getting arrested, and they ended up filing a lawsuit in reply against the transit agency. Her determination led to the installation of wheelchair lifts and critical changes to CTA buses and rail stations. Access Living became a disability leadership model for other cities around the country and around the world. In 1992, Marka co-founded the National Council on Independent Living, which she led for many years. In 1993, President Clinton named her to head the National Council on Disability. She was the first person with a disability ever to hold that post, and she held it until 2002. She was elected president of the United States International Council on Disabilities and traveled around the world advocating for people with disabilities and their families. She participated in the negotiation for the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, a global accord based on Americans with Disabilities Act. More than 60 nations have signed that treaty, including the United States. But sadly, this Senate has failed to ratify that treaty. I worked hours and hours with Marka to try to win the votes in the Senate for this bipartisan measure to help people with disabilities. We even brought former United States Senator Bob Dole, a World War hero and father of the ADA, to sit on the floor of the Senate when we cast the votes on this treaty. Unfortunately, it did not pass. Marka called July 26, 1990, the day President George H.W. Bush signed the Americans with Disabilities Act, quote, our Independence Day. On that day, she said, and I quote, this ragtag army of people who couldn't see, hear, walk, and talk did what everyone said couldn't be done. We passed the most comprehensive civil rights law since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. In a 2015 video interview for Rush University Medical Center, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, Marka said, the law for the first time enshrined in federal law that disability is a normal part of the human condition and the world needed to change. In July 2017, days before another ADA anniversary, Marka was again fighting for justice. She was one of more than 60 who were arrested for protesting about the proposed deep cuts in the Medicaid program that had been included in a Republican effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. As the Capitol Police wheeled her away, Marka raised a clenched fist and smiled. That's how I'm going to remember her. Optimistic, determined, even against long odds. Days after her arrest, another American hero with a disability, John McCain, came to this floor and in the well of this Senate, shocked his party and the nation by becoming the deciding vote against the repeal of the Affordable Care Act. I like to think my colleague from Arizona, John McCain, saw in Marka Bristo and her determined friends the same courage he had witnessed so often in our military. My wife Loretta and I extend our condolence to Marka's husband of 32 years, Bob Kettlewell, their two children, Samuel and Madeline, her granddaughter, who was born in June, to Marka's sister Gail, and to her countless friends and colleagues. Marka made the lives of hundreds of millions of people better. I'm going to miss her warm smile, her wise advice, her vision, and her courage.